Three AC-130J Ghostrider gunships touched down at Soto Cano Air Base, Honduras, just after midnight. No press release. No fanfare. Just the low rumble of turboprop engines cutting through the darkness as America's most lethal close air support aircraft positioned themselves 300 miles from Venezuela's border. Within hours, intelligence analysts in Caracas knew what Washington was signaling. The rules of engagement in the Western Hemisphere had just changed. This wasn't a drill. This was a message written in 40mm cannons and 105mm howitzers. And Nicolas Maduro was about to learn what it means when the United States deploys flying artillery batteries to your doorstep. To understand why the AC-130J Ghostrider deployment sent shockwaves through Latin America, you need to understand what this aircraft actually is. The Ghostrider isn't a fighter jet. It's not a bomber. It's a converted C-130 Hercules transport aircraft that's been transformed into a flying weapons platform capable of obliterating ground targets with surgical precision. Mounted on its left side are a 30mm GA-U-23 auto cannon, a 40mm Bofors cannon, and a 105mm howitzer. These weapons can fire while the aircraft circles a target area at altitudes up to 25,000 feet, raining down devastation with pinpoint accuracy guided by advanced targeting pods and infrared sensors. The aircraft can loiter over a battlefield for hours, providing continuous fire support that's been compared to having an entire artillery battalion in the sky. Special Operations Forces call it the most effective close air support platform ever built. Enemy forces call it the Angel of Death, and now 3 of them are positioned within striking distance of Venezuela, Colombia, and the entire northern tier of South America. The deployment didn't happen in a vacuum. It came after months of escalating tensions that have transformed the Caribbean basin into a potential flashpoint for great power conflict. Venezuela, sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves, has become increasingly aligned with Russia and China, while its authoritarian government under Maduro has destabilized the entire region. Over 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country, creating a humanitarian crisis that threatens Colombia, Brazil, and every nation in between. Drug trafficking organizations have exploited the chaos, turning Venezuela into a narco-state where cocaine flows freely toward American cities. Meanwhile, Maduro's regime has grown more aggressive, conducting military exercises near the borders of Guyana and Colombia, supporting armed groups that destabilize neighboring countries, and hosting Russian military advisors who provide training, intelligence, and advanced weapons systems. The Biden administration, facing domestic pressure to address both the refugee crisis and the flow of narcotics, decided that diplomatic pressure alone wasn't enough. Operation Southern Pressure, as it's being called in classified briefings, represents a fundamental shift in strategy. Instead of simply sanctioning Venezuela or providing aid to neighboring countries, Washington has chosen to position overwhelming military capability within immediate striking distance. The message is unmistakable. Cross certain red lines and the response will be swift, precise, and devastating. But the AC-130J deployment is only part of a larger military buildup. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group remains positioned in the Caribbean. Special Operations Forces have increased training missions with Colombian, Panamanian, and Honduran counterparts. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance flights along Venezuela's borders have intensified. Satellite imagery shows increased activity at U.S. military installations throughout Central America. This isn't a show of force. This is force positioning, pre-staging assets for potential operations that could range from humanitarian intervention to direct military action. The Ghostrider's unique capabilities make it particularly suited for the scenarios most likely to unfold. If Venezuela's military were to invade Guyana to seize disputed oil-rich territory, AC-130Js could provide immediate air support to Guyanese defense forces while U.S. ground troops deploy. If Colombian forces request assistance in striking major drug trafficking operations linked to Venezuelan government officials, the Ghostriders can deliver precision strikes that minimize collateral damage while maximizing effectiveness. If a hostage rescue or evacuation of American citizens becomes necessary, these aircraft provide the kind of overwhelming fire support that turns a dangerous extraction into a feasible operation. And perhaps most critically, if Russia were to deploy advanced anti-aircraft systems or fighter aircraft to Venezuela as they've done in Syria, the AC-130J's sensor suite and standoff weapons capabilities allow it to operate effectively, even in contested airspace. But deploying gunships 300 miles from a sovereign nation's border carries enormous risks. Venezuela's military, while degraded by years of corruption and economic collapse, still possesses Russian-made Su-30 fighter jets and S-300 surface-to-air missile systems. An AC-130J, for all its firepower, is not a fast or particularly maneuverable aircraft. It's designed to dominate permissive or semi-permissive environments, not to survive against advanced air defenses. This means the deployment only makes strategic sense if the United States is prepared to establish air superiority first, which would require suppression of enemy air defenses operations that would constitute acts of war. The international law implications are significant. Honduras, as a sovereign nation, has the right to host U.S. military forces on its territory. But using Honduran territory as a staging base for operations against Venezuela without United Nations authorization would be legally questionable and politically explosive. It would strain relationships with Brazil, Argentina, and other South American nations that oppose U.S. military intervention, regardless of Maduro's actions. It could provide Russia and China with propaganda victories, painting Washington as an imperial power willing to violate sovereignty when it suits American interests. And it risks turning a regional crisis into a broader conflict that draws in multiple actors with unpredictable consequences. Russia's response has been predictably aggressive. Moscow has announced plans to send additional military advisors to Venezuela and has warned that any U.S. military action in the region would be met with serious consequences. China, which has invested billions in Venezuelan oil infrastructure, has called for diplomatic solutions while quietly increasing its naval presence in the South Atlantic. Cuba, still dependent on Venezuelan oil despite decades of U.S. sanctions, watches nervously as its two most important allies, Caracas and Moscow, drag it toward a confrontation it cannot afford. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, diplomatic channels remain active. Brazil has proposed mediation. Colombia has expressed concerns about being caught between American operations and Venezuelan retaliation. The Organization of American States remains divided, unable to reach consensus on how to address Venezuelan authoritarianism while respecting sovereignty. And in Washington, policy debates rage between those who advocate for regime change through any means necessary and those who warn that military intervention would create more problems than it solves. The AC-130J crews at Soto Cano conduct training flights daily, familiarizing themselves with the terrain, practicing the attack profiles they might need, and maintaining readiness for orders that may never come or may come with just hours of warning. They understand the strategic calculus. They know their aircraft represents both deterrence and capability, a warning to Maduro that escalation carries consequences, and a promise to American allies that Washington will not abandon them to aggression. Every sortie is monitored by Venezuelan radar. Every training exercise is analyzed by Russian intelligence officers in Caracas. Every movement of personnel and equipment sends signals that are interpreted, misinterpreted, and weaponized in the information war that precedes actual combat. 3 AC-130J Ghostriders at Soto Cano Air Base. It sounds simple. But those 3 aircraft represent a commitment, a warning, and a gamble. The commitment is to regional partners who fear Venezuelan aggression. The warning is to Maduro's regime that certain actions will trigger overwhelming responses. And the gamble is that deterrence will work, that the mere presence of these flying artillery platforms will prevent the conflicts they're designed to win. The question isn't whether these aircraft can accomplish their missions. The question is whether they'll be ordered to. Operation Southern Pressure continues. The gunships remain on alert. And the Caribbean, once considered America's backyard, has become a chessboard where miscalculation could lead to consequences no one can fully predict. Subscribe to stay informed on this developing situation, because the next move could determine the future of an entire region. The Ghostriders are ready, the orders are pending, and the world is watching.